And there's so much to be said about like a multitude of factors related to the fact that people are overworked. There's not a lot of stability. Of course, there's this huge economic and ecological crisis that is looming above everybody. There's the mass problem with, the wealth distribution within a society. All these things play very largely into what is a collective problem, and people being massively and terminally online, like 24/7. I know I shouldn't be saying this as someone who's broadcasting online and hoping that you watch and subscribe and don't look away, not even for a second, because if you do, well then they win. Oh no, the plot thickens? Talia Lavin. Briahna Greyjoy did not say this would be a convo about de-radicalization. I wouldn't have agreed to it. I asked to change the subject many times. I also asked her not to publish it. Fuck you for saying my anger at Nazis that have targeted my family is performative. Wow. I'm beyond furious at this disingenuous presentation, these glib clips, and frankly, a facetious, ill-informed, and damaging Trojan horse of an interview. I deeply regret doing this, not because I'm ashamed of what I said, but because it was premised on false comedy and lies. Also, Molly said it would be about de-radicalization, to be honest. If there was someone in your life that you've lost to a hate movement, it is possible to bring them back from that, but on a societal level, focusing on de-radicalization as a primary tool to fight hate is like bailing out a flooded basement with the teacup while the storm still rages outside. I'm not accusing you of shit beyond being kind of a big old jerk. Anyways, I don't know what to say at this point beyond the next time I try to quit smoking, no podcast, but here's 288 pages of my thoughts on the rise of US fascism and how we fight it here. Warlords, my journey into the dark web of white supremacy. Ooh, I'm interested in reading this book. Culture Warlords is a story how Lavin, a frequent target of extremist trolls, including those of Fox News, dove into a Byzantine online culture of hate and learned the intricacies of how the white supremacist proliferates online. Within these pages, she reveals the extremists hiding in plain sight online, incels, white nationalists, white supremacists, nationalist socialists, Proud Boys, Christian extremists in order to showcase them in their natural habitat. Oh my. I assume Talia is Jewish, yes? Swords Jew. Yeah, well, there's that. This is going to obviously be controversial. Hey Talia, I have no interest in making you look like an idiot. I invited you on because I have a sincere interest in your perspective and wanted to learn more about it. I wrapped the episode by simply saying I regretted that it ended that way, which is true, and also that no one should listen to this and use it as an excuse to attack you online. We'd obviously appreciate your audio recording, but understand if you're feeling frustrated and don't want to hand it over, that is your right. We need to air Monday episodes, so we will be airing this. Had we recorded Friday night, we might be able to come up with something else. But regrettably, now we're up against the deadline. If you want to hop back on and finish the conversation, I'd be more than happy to do so. But it's obviously up to you. Oh my. I mean, kinda. I think if you want to hold hands with a Nazi and kiss them on the cheek, that's fine. Talia, do you think that's what I'm arguing for? Is that I, Briahna, Joy Gray, want to hold hands with Nazis and kiss them in the street? I mean, oh wow, this is
who
a train wreck.
Before you as a black woman wants to hold hands with Nazis and kiss them in the street. I'm not trying to debate you at all here. I'm trying to explore what I think are some tensions that I too am wrestling with. And I would hope that since we're both members of this group, of these groups, that certainly see no benefit in appeasing Nazis, that we can have a conversation that doesn't presume that where we're coming from is because of some natural sympathy with these groups, as opposed to genuinely trying to strategize about how to fix this problem that we very much agree on, which is that America is being increasingly radicalized in these extremist ways.
I feel like I've stated my position repeatedly, and then I don't quite know how to react other than to respond other than no, I really believe what I believe. I really think that stigmatization, that pariah, dumb, that physical confrontation, that I think people think that they're too cool for anti-fascism. People think anti-fascism is lame. People think that it's gauche. It's not enough. Yes, of course I believe that we should have Medicare for all, that we should have social safety net policies, that we
I kind of want to watch this full video considering it's all up.
The way,
you know what, I think I'm going to watch this. It's been a while since I watched Bad Faith. I think it's time, everybody. All right, I think we're ready to go.
The way to get out of this mess and the way to resolve the political balkanization and the rise of right-wing extremism is going to require...
No, we're not ready. I need to put in this one so I can make it louder.
The way to get out of this mess and the way to resolve
there we go.
The political balkanization and the rise of right-wing extremism is going to require a deprogramming that is not going to... It's going to require a broader deprogramming.
Sorry, I had to turn off that music. It wouldn't be very good faith of me to start this, let's say, review with Final Fantasy VII battle music in the background. It certainly seems like I'm trying to create conflict rather than simply be a passive observer, which is really my intent.
That accesses the core of what's driving people into these communities at higher and higher rates, right? And that it's not necessarily going to be about saying you're racist and you're bad, even if that's 100% true, but that it's going to be about figuring out what compels an individual to find more solace in white supremacy than another kind of community. And so I wonder, I wonder what your thoughts are on that as a leftist. You know, is there an incompatibility with wanting to do have a broad multiracial coalition and a kind of insistence? I mean, you're dealing with a really narrow extreme part of the country. So I don't want to say that every conservative or every Trump voter is implicated in this conversation. But, you know, do you ever feel like there is a tension between kind of the need to coalition build and a perception of a certain segment of society as kind of...
All right. Yes, it was Final Fantasy VI. Okay? I'll accept that I was wrong. I was trying to absorb the content of this podcast to see what they're talking about important issues, de-radicalization, other things that are deeply concerning to all of us, and yet we're just fixated on what was the music from, which Final Fantasy iteration. It was 6. You are correct. It was 6. 6 was a fucking awesome game. Okay? You have all of that. It was... It's known as Final Fantasy III in the United States, so you might be a little confused as to why we're splitting hairs here, but there you have it.
Untouchable.
I don't feel that tension. I understand that other people do. I'm in the Punch a Nazi School of Applied Mechanics. I have no sympathy for these people. And it's not just at a personal peak.
I like her already.
Because people talk about deprogramming, de-radicalization. Every time I give a book talk, 4 or 5 of the questions are about can't we just kumbaya, de-radicalize? And you have no idea what goes into de-radicalization. Genuinely, de-radicalization, this magical term that people use constantly, is a years-long process, requires, people to be mentally ready to leave. It's analogous to quitting smoking. It's fucking hard. And sometimes people might want to kill you for leaving.
Here's what I will interject with right off the bat. Specifically when it comes to de-radicalization, she is right. If you are already fully into something like, let's just say, neo-Nazism, and you've gone full in and you're actually part of an organization that is trying to effectively militarily set yourself up as the master race or whatever that is, then yes, de-radicalization just as a concept is very difficult. Deprogramming someone, especially if they're in a cult, is incredibly difficult. If you watch documentaries on deprogrammers, it doesn't matter sometimes what they have. They can have members of the family come in, they can have their ex-wives or husbands come in, they can have their children come in, and they can be sitting down with them and being like, I am going to show you why what you are believing is a lie, and show them pictures, and now you see that it's been a lie. This person doesn't actually levitate and is the great space lizard. You can see that, right? And still, they will just be like, these are just fabrications brought forth by the great space walrus to try and destroy us. But no, I will truly believe in the great space lizard until the end of days. So it is very difficult in that respect. Something that I think is more fruitful is preventing people from going down that pipeline in the first place, because people aren't getting recruited online to join the neo-Nazis from even far-right figures like Richard Spencer, right? I mean, Richard Spencer's in shambles now, but whatever the equivalent of Richard Spencer is for a popular figure, or people like Jared Taylor or Stefan Molyneux, they're all race realists to far racists to actual Nazis, right? But they're not the ones who are like, and now join the neo-Nazis in your local area at the end of their broadcasts. But it's that pipeline that people go down online where they can start out somewhere and then end up in another end of the internets and all of a sudden be interested in the stuff. They will then seek it out themselves. Once they're interested in this, once they're interested in these complete made up nonsense lies that there's something about racial superiority, then they can go join organizations, at which point she is correct. Pulling them out of the organizations themselves is going to be increasingly difficult and might not be a great way to expend your resources compared to, in my opinion, preventing them from ever getting that far, which is ultimately fruitful, because you can look at the difference between the way YouTube used to be, the way the algorithm used to reward, people who were on the right to far right, and even the alt-right back when that stuff was popular, and where it's come from until now. There's now a much larger presence of either lefty or non-alt-right thought and let's just say content creators that are out there.
And so you have to be really fucking ready to leave. And most people don't want to. They enjoy it. They enjoy the cruelty. They enjoy the camaraderie. They feel community. They feel acceptance, right? So I think, if you're willing to engage in a years-long emotional connection of extraordinary strength, to the point where I've heard of like people marrying their de-radicalizers or spending years having dinner with their de-radicalizers, only to like eventually maybe arrive at a sort of tenuous former status. If you're prepared to do that, fine. That's not scalable. What is scalable is saying like these sentiments are unacceptable. You cannot show up in my town. You cannot show up in my university. I think that many people want to kumbaya because for them, the prospect of like standing up and like fucking punching a Proud Boy is uncomfortable. And they want to see themselves as more tolerant. And for me,
the Vanguard made a decent point that while on its face, Talia's stance here sounds good, the problem comes on the way that most libs call anyone they disagree with Nazis. Yes, that's true. She's talking about actual Nazis. She's talking about people who are neo-Nazis in neo-Nazi organizations who have gone that far. She's not specifically talking about how online someone I disagree with because they didn't give me the right Starbucks coffee name is a Nazi. Like that's, yeah, sure, that could be a huge problem, but I think she's pretty clear. Maybe that's unfortunate for liberal audience members who are going to watch this and be like, wait, what are you saying, that I can't change the opinion of my barista? Because my barista was a Nazi yesterday, but my barista was awesome the day before. I mean, the day before she was a saint, and then maybe she'll be a Nazi again today. I can't tell.
Me, at least, I'm like, cool, your conception of yourself as tolerant and marketplace of ideas-y and willing to coalition build, whatever, like, matters more to you than my safety and the safety of like all the marginalized people that these people attack. Like, I really, if I sound angry, it's because I'm an angry person. I'm also quitting smoking, and also fuck a Nazi. Like, fuck them. Okay, I don't care about them. I don't care about their lives. I want them to die. Like, I really am just like, I have no patience. No patience. Like, and the more we socially marginalize these views, the more we make them unacceptable, the fewer people will join. If you deplatform someone, if you play whack-a-mole enough, like, you make it annoying and difficult, you dox people, you get them their jobs lost for holding these views publicly, for saying that they want to burn Jews and kill, N-words. You make it socially absolutely poison to do these things.
So is there evidence of that, Talia? Is there evidence that approach, because you say that the approach you're describing is scalable and the de-radicalization approach isn't. But what strikes me is that it seems like there has been a radicalization approach that has been taking years. The radicalizers are happy to take years and pursue this project, and that they have been able to scale it at a significant degree. That in some ways, and we've talked about the Powell memo on the show a lot, but it's this.
Oh, yeah, not just Richard Spencer. There's a lot of examples of deplatforming neo-Nazis to alt-righters, to race realists, and the efficacy of that. I mean, you should look at Stefan Molyneux. He's a good example, because Stefan Molyneux isn't someone who's on his show on a regular basis being like, I believe strictly in the superiority of the white race and that we should all join in arms and then take down all the other inferior races. But he was a lot less subtle than other people who may believe those kind of things, where he would talk about how there was a difference in the weight of white people and black people and their brain size, a lot of really strange, icky stuff like that. He was also talking about how I'm an empiricist, and I know that when I go to Poland and other countries that are predominantly white, there's less crime on the streets because, again, I'm an empiricist, not a racist. So he was horrifying and scary and all that terrible stuff. When he got deplatformed from YouTube, he thought that there would be a big, large swath of his audience that was going to jump on over to BitChute, and that they were going to come on down to BitChute, and they're all just going to love jumping onto this new platform. They're going to be totally fine with it, and that's the reason why he had the sustained amount of people watching him that he did. Turned out only like 8% of them actually followed him along. So it's completely crippled his ability to try and sound like he's the one academic who knows all the secrets about race and IQ and stuff like that, right? So it has effectively really abolished a lot of what Stefan Molyneux used to be able to propagate on the internet. And it was effective in that sense. One thing I've always tried to put forward is that we have a larger battle when it comes to Silicon Valley and when it comes to tech companies. And that battle is that we've already ceded the ground to them in that they are the arbiters of speech itself. That should not be in the hands of corporations, especially it shouldn't be in the hands of private corporations, especially shouldn't be in the hands of private corporations that are largely dominated, whose boards and CEOs happen to be cis white men. That's not a good thing. I don't like that Mark Zuckerberg and Jack Dorsey single-handedly can make a lot of decisions that will affect billions of human beings. That's not the power that any one person should have. And I just mean that altogether. Like, if you offered that to me, I would be like, oh, what extreme power? But like, no, not like one or two people should not be able to control what billions of people think and say and hear. You can look no further than QAnon to see the problem there. So I think one of the larger problems that needs to be reined in is big tech needs to either be broken up or it needs to be publicly owned, publicly controlled, because the decision making that goes into who should be allowed to have and not have a platform right now is in a very small dictatorship. That is a monstrously huge issue that needs to be tackled. If I had a vote, you can bet that people like Richard Spencer and Stefan Molyneux and all of their shit would be gone a long ass time ago, especially if it happens to be in countries that have laws, direct laws against hate speech. Because yeah, there's different laws in Canada than there is in the United States. The United States has this kind of like free speech absolutism mentality. As long as you're not directly calling for violence against someone or saying that you want to assassinate a political leader or something like that, you pretty much have absolute free speech. You don't have freedom of consequence, but you have freedom of speech. Whereas in countries like Canada, or Germany is another example, you do not have absolute free speech. Like, people have kind of determined that things like hate speech, for example, there should be protected classes, because at the end of the day, marginalized communities you're going to give a lot of power to otherwise incredibly bad actors, such as neo-Nazis and stuff like that.
Famous memo by soon-to-be Supreme Court Justice Lewis Powell, where he set out an agenda for the Conservative Party in the 1970s and said, well, look, we're losing the culture wars. This is how we fix it. And
Dusty 48 with an incredibly astute point, and the biggest and most effective white nationalist today is Tucker Carlson. True.
It was 30 years before Fox News, which was one of the goals of the Powell memo, a right-wing news organization, manifested. And, we're just now seeing the apotheosis of their efforts to take the Supreme Court and all of this stuff, right? And that there is a way that the long game, I think, while frustrating and not as instantly gratifying, is very effective. On the other hand, I'm concerned about what it means to say something like, we don't let them into our towns, we don't let them into our universities. Just on a logistical level, I don't know what that even begins to look like. And so I am skeptical about the idea that in and of itself could be scalable.
You're completely entitled to your skepticism. I mean, I don't know what else to tell you. Like, the Lavin memo then is a 30-year long plan of fuck like racism and make it unacceptable, make it pariah, make it like throw it onto an island and an ice floe, and do
what
that
does it look
through physical violence and through everything from physical violence to doxing to public protest. I have no interest in building a coalition with these people, and you may, but the less attractive you can make these ideas seem, to bring back the smoking analogy. Fewer people smoke because you can't smoke in a movie theater.
I only know them on
Twitch
Twitch.
You can't smoke in a bar. Fewer people smoke because you have to stand on a street corner and feel like shit. So
what
let's
was
make
it,
it like
Talia?
that.
What was it that made you at this point?
So I'm just going to say this right out. Talia obviously is not concerned with optics, because the idea of saying that I just wish death upon other human beings is not like, you know, even if they're Nazis or neo-Nazis, is not something that's going to probably be as easily accessible to people who are going to listen to this, because again, as someone has already stated, liberal audiences watching this are going to think like, well, what does she mean by Nazis? Because we call everything we don't like a Nazi these days, right? And she's talking about literal fascists. She's talking about people who have already joined far-right organizations, alt-right organizations, who are training, who are armed, who are planning stuff. They are too far gone, and that much is true. Like the amount of time that you would have to spend to deprogram one of them compared to, like, when you hear about deprogramming on the internet, if you're talking about like the debate lords like Vosh and stuff like that taking on neo-Nazis, the people they're usually battling and fighting are not people who are in these organizations. They are people who are very, very online like the rest of us and want to get a quick own, and sometimes it's just edgy teenagers who think it's funny if I make all these racist jokes and stuff like that, right? But those are two very, very different things in the way they're discussing this.
Decide to quit smoking?
I've been running, and I wanted to be able to run more.
So it wasn't that people kind of harangued you and said smoking is bad.
Oh, that helped. That helped.
But I presume that people have been saying that sort of thing since whatever it was you started smoking. It's bad for your health. Blah, blah, blah.
I mean, listen, like
smells,
I don't think that I'm going to be able to convince you. I think if you want to like hold hands with a, you know, Nazi and kiss them gently on the cheek, that's fine. I just don't think that's going to work out well for you.
Do you think that what I'm arguing for is that I Briahna Joy Gray, who was sitting before you as a Black woman, wants to hold hands with Nazis and kiss them in the street? I'm not trying to debate you at all here. I'm trying to explore what I think are some tensions that I too am wrestling with, and I would hope that since we're both members of this group, of these groups that certainly see no benefit in appeasing Nazis, that we can have a conversation that doesn't presume that where we're coming from is because of some natural sympathy with these groups, as opposed to genuinely trying to strategize about how to fix this problem that we very much agree on, which is that America is being increasingly radicalized in these extremist ways.
I feel like I've stated my position repeatedly, and then I don't quite know how to react to respond other than like, no, I really believe what I believe. Like, I really think like that stigmatization, that pariah, dumb, that physical confrontation, that, you know, I think people think that they're too cool for anti-fascism. People think anti-fascism is lame. People think that, you know, it's gauche. It's not enough. Yes, of course, I believe that like we should have Medicare for all, that we should have social like safety net policies, that we shouldn't like leave people to be deprived, alone, like to feel like these senses of loss and like, you know, the elements of vulnerability to radicalization are like very common human emotions. Is feeling lost, is feeling lonely, is feeling purposeless, and like, you know, everything we can do to mitigate those feelings in such large masses of the population, like, that's great. I think there are many constructive things you can do to fight Nazism that don't involve like, you know, brass knuckling up and like just flattening the nose of a Proud Boy, but like I think you have to be willing to brass knuckle up and flatten the nose of a Proud Boy too. Like there is no space for coalitional politics with these people, to my mind.
So one of the, I think, parts of the book that I found to be really interesting was when you were talking about how banal many of these individuals were when you were talking to them on the websites and the dating site, right? And how the banality of their lives was abutting these like really horrific belief systems. And you would go from talking about, you know, casually, oh, I'm making my pork and bean dinner or whatever, to, you know, Jews, let's kill them,
mismanagement
am I right?
counts.
You know?
Yeah, or like, let's talk about the, you know, N-words.
Yeah. So I remember when I was, you know, reading that section, you know, you explained that the banality almost made you feel less empathy for these people. Can you talk a little bit about the kind of emotional reaction you had to being that close and in those intimate spaces and having these people trust you in that way with these incredibly ugly parts of their lives?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's like, so you'll see so often in journalism about Nazis, this shock that they're people. Like it's there was an infamous sort of New York Times profile of Tony Hoveder,
Oh
who's
yeah,
you know,
that was a weird article.
pretty well known white supremacist. Was like, oh my God, like he has a wife and a house and like he made dinner and like
It was all about humanizing him. It was
he didn't,
really
like,
strange.
I don't know, jizz a swastika onto the wall while making pasta. Like, I mean, it's that level of parodic, like, oh my God, Nazis are people too. And I'm like, of course they're people. You start with the presumption that they're people with whole lives, with
This is what you're saying, QB. If I gave a snack to Chico for every mute, I'd be like this. It's true. Chico would not be having a good time. I'll say that much.
moral universes as complex and wild as yours and mine. And like, you start with the assumption that these are ordinary people. And then you see what these ordinary people have dedicated their lives to. And if that doesn't make you fucking mad, it makes me fucking mad.
Yeah, so
it doesn't absolve them. Their humanity doesn't absolve them. Their humanity condemns them for it.
So I completely relate to this frustration that folks are shocked about the fact that races aren't, you know, some separate breed or species that, you know, are easily identified by, you know, tentacles or something. Like I totally relate to that feeling. At the same time, when I was reading your description of these lives, what struck me was not necessarily that they were so average, but there were some ways in which it did feel very atypical. A lot of the guys that you described, you know, you talk at length about describing the incel movement, the involuntary celibates, that a lot of these men have very little in the way of kind of romantic or social infrastructure in their lives at all. You describe one guy making dinner and that he makes the same kind of, it was kind of a bizarre, very unbalanced meal of like pork and beans or something every single night.
Canned beef and pineapples.
Canned beef. Oh yes, it was beef and like canned beans and then a swig of pineapple juice to break it up, I guess, so he doesn't get scurvy. You know, and I remember reading that and thinking, oh, well, this, I mean, in some ways it's banal because he's like a guy making dinner every night, but in other ways, the details of his life point to someone who is not a functioning member of society and has a lot of other things going on. That led me not to say it absolves him of any way, because there are a lot of poor people who aren't obviously white supremacists. In fact, obviously disproportionately, poor people in America are not white at all. But it did, I gotta confess, it did make me not feel empathy for the person, but it made me say, this is a tension point for political radicalization. Like, this is an opportunity to provide something that could lead this person to want to make different kinds of choices, if in fact, part of what's driving him to be a white supremacist are these other aspects of his life that seem very unpleasant and bad, and that no one should be dealing with and living like. And I wonder if there was ever, I mean, it's difficult because it is difficult to talk.
It's a massive question too, though, and it's one that like people are constantly debating over. Like, what exactly does cause the radicalization, not only of youth, but just of, you know, white males into organizations that are dangerous? Incels, 3%ers, Proud Boys, the Boogaloo Boys. What exactly is, like, people want this kind of universal brush, kind of like how they've always wanted a theory of everything in physics. The idea that there's just this simple way to examine this, and that if we could just handle X and get rid of X, then online radicalization and or just people going down the pipeline of becoming white nationalists wouldn't be as big of an issue, or wouldn't be as big of a problem. And there's so many factors. I mean, I've heard leftists say that it's capitalism. I've heard people say that the rise of fascism has to come from things like poverty. Fidjamine, thanks for the Prime Gaming. Yeah, people have said it's mosquitoes, of course, that as well. But what it actually really boils down to is that there isn't just a simple solution, a simple answer, like a prescriptive answer. Like if we just did X, we would stop having this. It's a lot of things. It is mass alienation. That is a huge thing. There's also a massive problem with the way social media has changed and shaped our lives and our interactions with each other, and even our attention spans. And there's so much to be said about like a multitude of factors related to the fact that people are overworked. There's not a lot of stability. There's this huge economic and ecological crisis that is looming above everybody. There's the mass problem with the wealth distribution within a society. All these things play very largely into what is a collective problem, and people being massively and terminally online, like 24/7. I know I shouldn't be saying this as someone who's broadcasting online and hoping that you watch and subscribe and don't look away, not even for a second, because if you do, well then they win.
God,
but
those communists are amazing.
For the most part, thanks, Mad Lupine, appreciate it. For the most part, it is collectively a huge problem.
Talk about this without feeling like you're letting.
Hey, Rowan Bear, it was me all along. And you should probably go check out Rowan Bear's YouTube channel when you do get a chance.
People off the hook for their loathsome behaviors. But in a practical way, I guess as someone who doesn't see a lot of utility in telling people that they are bad, as changing their mind. Like if I thought it worked to just be like Nazism is horrible and you shouldn't be a Nazi, then I'd be like, yes, we should just put that on every bridge and tunnel in America and that would solve the problem.
I mean, I say we give that a shot. Like, I mean, honestly, like if people showed up en masse every time there was a right-wing march, if people bothered to do that instead of deciding that the pragmatic approach is sympathy for the devil.
Well, again, I wouldn't characterize it as sympathy for the devil, but are those things mutually exclusive? Is showing up to a right-wing march the way, Antifa and some groups do? And there are often counter protests. Is that mutually exclusive?
She's right. Briahna Joy Gray's
saying
right there.
There needs to be long-term de-radicalizers, people like, Daryl Davis.
Like, for example, a lot of the right-wing rallies that go on in the United States, they seem a lot scarier online because, like, we've always seen the most horrifying ones, obviously things like Charlottesville, or I mean, if you want to color it as such, the January 6th insurrection, kind of stuff like that, right? Even though I think that is actually kind of like a collage of a whole bunch of different groups. But typically, when there's going to be a Proud Boys rally, a far-right rally, it is often met with there's also going to be a counterinsurgence of anti-fascists who are going to be there as well. That point is true.
Who we brought up on this podcast many times before, who do engage in that more long-term effort, and
Daryl Davis is a wonderful person. Daryl Davis is also one man. Shannon Foley Martinez is another example of someone who works with formers. But again, this is not scalable. These are years long, immensely intimate, emotional stuff. I think if you want social policies that make life less of a hideous, precarious ladder over an abyss, fine. But know that every one of these people is going to fight you every step of the way of implementing these policies because they will go to people of color too.
So why is it an individual act?
What are you even advocating for?
Well, let's try to figure that out, Talia. What I'm curious about is why is it an individual act when someone like Daryl Davis does what he does? For those who don't remember, Daryl Davis is a black man who, famously has a number of like Klan robes in his closet because every time he talks a Klan member out of being in the Klan, they give him a robe, and he's like the great Klan whisperer. He's also apparently a very renowned jazz musician. But it's interesting to me to see it as an individual act when it's Daryl Davis, but not an individual act when an individual decides to put brass knuckles on and punch a Nazi. And what I'm questioning is the scalability. The reason I'm questioning it is because I think a lot of people aren't going to feel able or safe to do the Nazi punching, right? So it doesn't seem to me. I would say, like, why not both? If you are adherent to Nazi punching, I mean, great. I mean, like, fine. I'm certainly not arguing against that, but I am concerned about saying that we want to minimize the potential effects of doing the alternative approach. And the reason I wanted to talk to you about that, Talia, is because you have an exposure to what it's like to be in those spaces and potentially some insights that other folks who haven't engaged in that project don't have. And I'm curious to pick your brain about whether or not, for example, when you're on these dating sites, do you ever engage in any kind of conversations that tried to see what would happen if you raised doubts about being a white supremacist, or brought up, well, there's this one black person at work who's okay, and sometimes what are those kind of conversations like?
Happen. Those conversations incel spaces bar women, like the whitedate.net is white.
I feel like I agree with a lot of Talia's points in this discussion so far, but she has definitely been, between the two of them, the one who seems to be more upset during the course of this conversation, right? Like, I feel, even though I'm usually like, what the hell is Briahna Joy Gray doing on any given day? she's like trying to redirect the conversation while it continues to become more antagonistic.
State.net. Like, what, I'm supposed to write to people who are talking about like the evil Marxists and darkies and say like, actually, like black people aren't so bad after all. I mean, honestly, if I had known that this was going to be an extended conversation about the utility of de-radicalization versus anti-fascism, I would absolutely have not agreed to be on this podcast, because I've gotten this banal question over and over and over again, and I loathe it at this point. Like, people like.
Fair enough. I didn't know that. Right before I made my statement, I was like, "Oh, okay. Well, that explains everything." I didn't know.
I mean, I understand coalition building and desires, but like,
There's no coalition building with white nationalists or white supremacists. Let's just get this out there. I mean, if anyone is suggesting that outside of Jimmy Dore, that maybe there are members of the Boogaloo Boys who want to fight for the same things, and we should be open to this. No, just shut that stuff down as quickly as it arrives.
Find it that like most people aren't capable of engaging in like with this level of like being in those spaces. Is it fucking like dipping your head in acid? And I did it for a year and a half. I wouldn't ask anyone else to do it. And I wouldn't expose myself to emotional intimacy with those people on a real level, like not through the mask of an avatar. I don't like, I wouldn't, I mean, maybe because I'm a Jew, I wouldn't wind up radicalized in the same way, but like anyone is susceptible to propaganda. Like asking people to like imbibe white supremacist propaganda and engage in emotional intimacy with white supremacists, which is what de-radicalization entails, a deep emotional intimacy of years-long relationships of talking, conversation. And like, yes, that is inherently more personal than a punch in the face. You know, like I've done some crazy shit. Like, I mean, even after the book, like around the election, I was, you know, undercover in like the 3% Georgia security force, like walkie-talkie channel. I had a false identity. I had a false face. I did over an hour-long interview. I had a backstory, emotions. I talked to people. You know, it's hard. It's hard to do that. It's fine. But I had a mask. I had the protection of a lie to cover me. If I had just been naked to those sentiments, like I don't know that I would have even gotten through it. Like it was hard enough as it was. Like this stuff is aqua regia. These conversations that take place in Nazi chat rooms, these conversations that take place on these forums are poison. They are poison, and they are perpetual emotion machines of radicalization. So yeah, like maybe, I mean, and if you went in and you said like, hey, like,
well, that's why I would say my approach would be that a lot of the things that are being used to radicalize them are the ones that you can target. That you'd probably have a lot more, let's just say, results that'll come as a benefit of doing that. So if you want to target, say, content creators who are leading people down towards radicalization, if you want to target websites that are allowing radicalization to fester and grow, if you want to target groups, subreddits, stuff like that, that I think isn't fruitless in any way, shape, or form. And I think maybe the disagreement comes from the fact that like once you get to that point of full radicalization, then yes, she's entirely right. Talia's right. It's like if you are that far gone that you are in the organization and you are training and you genuinely believe that there's a superiority amongst the races, something that is completely fabricated and made up, then yeah, I mean, you're in a cult. Like deprogramming someone in a cult is an incredibly arduous and long and challenging thing. My point would be, why not prevent the cultists from ever entering?
Knock it off. Don't talk about immigrants that way. You just be kicked out, and they'd dox you anyway.
I don't know that that's what I said, Talia, but that characterization aside, I totally understand and would never ask anybody to engage in de-radicalization either. I mean, I've had this conversation in other contexts where, you know, there's a certain strain, for example, of political discourse among a lot of kind of Black liberals that will say, it's not my job to teach you about racism. You know, it's you educate yourself, pick up a book, you know, that kind of lingo, which is fine. It's extremely taxing. I've spent my entire life as a Black woman in predominantly white spaces being called upon to do exactly that. And it is sometimes tiresome. I remember thinking in law school at a certain point, somebody should be paying me a professor's salary instead of asking me to pay the institution because of all the work I'm doing with my classmates after class ends, explaining to them this crap that the teachers in many respects aren't qualified to cover, even though it's directly germane to the material. So I certainly empathize with that. But I also wouldn't ask any individual to engage in a physical altercation with a Nazi. I'm not asking anybody to do anything. What I'm trying to explore is the potential political utility of different kinds of options and to assess how effective de-radicalization actually is. I'm not making a claim or an argument right now. What I'm trying to do is have a conversation about what the limitations of various approaches are so we as a community can figure out the best way to go forward.
I mean, I am just curious why you would ask a militant anti-fascist to talk about the utility of de-radicalization. This seems like a setup for frustration for both of us.
Well, I certainly am not intending to frustrate you, and I'm not so frustrated. I mean, I think it's interesting.
Maybe it could have been a case of Briahna doing more research on the person she's asking to interview, because that person has been pretty clear. If you wanted to talk to me about these kind of questions, I would not have done this. And after the fact, if you followed the drama that was setting this whole thing up, she said that I asked her not to publish this. Like, please don't put this up there, because it's just not something I want out there.
I'm asking you the questions that naturally raised in my mind when I read your book. Is there some aspect of the book that you would prefer to talk about? I mean, we haven't really talked in detail about what the book actually lays out. So I want to give you an opportunity to tell the audience what you think the biggest takeaway is and why you think that they should read it, what it is in fact about, what your goals were in writing it.
My goal was to make people...
I mean, Ramsey's, that's personal. Whatever reason she has. She like just publicly made a statement that I asked Briahna Joy Gray not to publish this episode, and it still happened.
Aware of the perniciousness of the threat.
And legally, I'm sure Briahna Joy Gray probably had, I don't know, consent form signed or whatever it was, or felt that she had a right to publish it. So that's where I think a lot of the trauma is coming from.
Make people aware of some of the ideological bases and the emotional bases that radicalization rests on. My encouragement was specifically to uplift the anti-fascist movement and to encourage people to become active anti-fascists, militant anti-fascists. It is explicitly a book endorsing action of all kinds, including from behind the keyboard and in the streets, to head this radicalization, this radicalized movement of people who want to kill people that look like me and my family and people who look like you and your family, and head them off at the pass and to fight as urgently as they're fighting.
Hey, YouTube, don't forget this is a podcast.
Wow, this one ends very different than the clips online that we were looking at. It almost ends as if it was a pleasant interaction. Okay, I do have something very important to say about all this, though. This goes back to this problem. I've seen quite a bit, especially in the last couple of weeks, this idea, especially amongst leftists. It was weird to see of don't vote. You know, I'm sure you've seen a handful of people put out those things, or like, you know, what's the point? Why even bother in the political process? At the end of the day, Democrats, Republicans, they're all the exact same thing. They're all just corporate, deeply entrenched vehicles of manipulated suckers. Every single one of them. And you're a bunch of sheeple if you engage in the political process. And meanwhile, we want to talk about radicalization. So that conversation you just saw with Briahna Joy Gray and Talia about radicalization, something that I have been witnessing for some time now, and we're witnessing it both in Canada and the United States, is what I'm about to show you. The idea that all these groups online, especially groups like QAnon, for example, and what they've grown into, have decided to move beyond the keyboards, to move beyond the screens, to do the Ringu thing, where they're actually going to come through the screen and like try and touch you, into this. We found thousands of Trump supporters taking over local GOP positions. An unprecedented grassroots groundswell devoted to Trump's insistence that the 2020 election was stolen, and Republicans need to stop that from happening again. The movement was organized in far-right media, led by figures like Steve Bannon, Michael Flynn, and Lynn Wood, and spread on fringe social media platforms and forums aligned with QAnon. Now, all the time that has been spent with like fruitless endeavors that have made the left fight each other, such as force the vote, should have been spent on things like this. This is actually horrifying and real and is about to take place, and you are getting thousands of people who may be old school QAnoners who are now flooding, as per their organization, by decentralized online forums, decentralized online message boards, organized loosely by people like Steve Bannon, of course, who are now going to be trying to enter small local GOP races. This is what the left should have been doing. This is what the left should be doing. This is what leftists who genuinely want to enact change, especially in the political system in the United States, should be doing. Like I'm saying, to the degree of thousands, running for local office, running for local political office, running as the new form of the Democrat, not becoming fringe third parties that no one ever ends up voting for, but actually changing the very landscape of the GOP itself. This has been the goal of Steve Bannon for a while, and it's becoming effective. And this next wave you're going to see is going to be something to behold. This is going to be a lot more important than, say, performative acts that you're seeing being done by a lot of people who kind of fall under the Jimmy Dore pipeline. You know, performative acts like organizing this Medicare for March for Medicare for All, which has all the branding of the Bernie Sanders movement, but has none of the political veracity that Bernie Sanders himself had, or the potential to enact change like the Bernie Sanders movement had, and then to utilize that in order to get a whole bunch of more views, a whole bunch more subs, say that I've got Susan Sarandon speaking for me. Well, at the same time, this is the shit that is going to change the course of political history. If you have thousands of people, even if a small percentage of them, think even if 15% or 10% of them were to get into office, that's 100 QAnoners who are now in political office from all levels of government in the United States. That's something that like does not have the organizational performance of a lot of the online left, or even the performative left, where it happens to be all these podcasters and YouTubers and all this kind of stuff. Meanwhile, this is happening. Like, Steve Bannon isn't just doing this for his personal enrichment. He's not just doing this to be more famous. He has a goal in mind. He has a goal in mind and he wants to achieve it, and he has already tasted the sun. He has gone as far as the US presidency. Why not keep going down this road of nationalism? Like, if you watch any of Steve Bannon's documentaries, and he's a prolific documentary maker, they're fucking atrocious. Just watch the like YouTube summaries of them. This has always been his goal. He wants to recruit more and more people into patriotism and nationalistic ideals and then have them enact change in the political arena. And he's doing it. So this isn't just a game for him. This isn't just like, I can't wait to get a whole bunch more subs. Can't wait to be a partnered streamer. Can't wait to have myself a big old YouTube channel. Can't wait to have a podcast that has like 10,000 to 20,000 patrons who help support me and give me like $50,000 a month. This is him trying to change the face of US history and in turn world history. And I'm sorry to say he's doing a really good job of it. So these are the kind of things that if you are genuinely wanting to change, the political arena as a leftist, you should be looking at. And the same thing, by the way, is happening over in Canada. I was going to talk about this later, but I might as well bring it up now. Justin Trudeau today got stoned. He got hit by gravel, by people throwing it at him. By the same people who are doing all this anti-mask bullshit in Canada. They are the ones who are galvanized. They are the ones who are out there right now. There's an election coming up in Canada, and right now the groups who are protesting on the streets that are literally blocking ambulances from getting into the hospitals, they happen to be anti-maskers. They happen to be anti-vaxxers. They're the ones who are like, no more lockdown, you're a goddamn traitor. They're coming out onto the streets in the thousands. I'm not seeing this from the left. I'm not seeing this from like the socialists or the anarchists or the anarcho-communists. None of them are just doing these massive visual demonstrations. These people are stopping ambulances in the streets. These people are throwing rocks at the Prime Minister of Canada to get their point across. Now, granted, they happen to be aligned with a little bit of the fascist state, so you will see this idea, like, yes, it's true, the RCMP are not giving them any kind of a time. I mean, if a whole bunch of indigenous activists took to the streets, yes, they get arrested. They get beaten up, they get put in jail. So that's just the reality of the situation, whereas these people just kind of have carte blanche. But it's getting scarier because they're actually teaming up with viable political candidates. They're aligning themselves with conservatives and, more importantly, with the PPC. Not the drug, but those who are running in that party might as well be on it for the kind of racism that they're espousing.
This hour on the federal campaign trail, where heated protests have now escalated to violence. Demonstrators targeted Liberal leader Justin Trudeau at a stop in London, Ontario yesterday. At least one protester threw what appeared to be gravel or small stones at Trudeau while he was boarding his bus. The Liberal leader told...
Now, don't get me wrong. Fuck Justin Trudeau. Fuck his neoliberalism. Fuck him basically governing from the center, consistently being like, hey, I'm here for basically, social policies that are very progressive, while at the same time, I'm going to be a great big old friend to the energy sector, all about pipelines, all about deforestation, all about enforcing these kind of things through Indigenous land with the RCMP, all about suing the families of residential school survivors, all that bullshit. Yes. Fuck Justin Trudeau, all right? I talk about how shitty Justin Trudeau is on a very regular basis. At the same time, the people who are going to his rallies outside of the Indigenous protesters who have done it as well happen to be en masse anti-maskers, anti-vaxxers, just right-wing pieces of shit. But they are galvanized. Like, I don't know what it was about having to wear a little bit of cloth over the course of a year and a half over the last year, but it has made them very politically angry and politically dangerous, and they are the ones that are gathering in large groups on the streets. They are the ones that are doing nationwide protests in major cities. They are the ones that are standing outside. They're the ones that you hear from. Like, if you are walking in the streets of Vancouver on a semi-regular basis, you're probably going to, like, meet one of these little parades of anti-maskers who drive by with their shitty paint jobs on their cars that are all like, the China flu is here, anti-masks, masks kill kids, even though, like, kids under 12 don't need to wear them here. Weird shit like that.
Told reporters afterwards he was...
Oh, they're overwhelmingly white. Oh, no question. They're overwhelmingly white, and they're overwhelmingly with the racist far-right party of Canada, the PPC.
In fact, hit, but was okay. That stop in London is just the latest where Trudeau has faced angry demonstrators. Janice McGregor begins our coverage this morning. She's in Ottawa looking at these demonstrations. We've seen a lot of concern about these during the campaign so far. What do we know about these latest protesters, Janice?
Well, there are a lot of reasons why people might come out to see Trudeau. A lot of reasons why people could be angry. You know, the reasons are as individual as each person in that crowd.
I'm going to say this, chat, all right? All right, your cup runneth over on wild Canadian accents over the past 3 weeks. When I told you that the Canadian election was getting announced, that I was going to be the #1 source for all things Election Canada. I was going to be the #1 broadcaster on the internet for the Canadian election, and I was going to involve myself heavily with Indigenous candidates. I did not know that y'all were going to get so many aboots. You got them all. Damn, all the accents.
Crowd.
Commute.
When behavior like this does escalate, people have questions about whether it is centrally organized, whether there's some kind of financing.
Great.
When you hear that there are
for all the stuff you can make fun of Canada for, and you definitely should, please keep doing it all the time. A is not one of them. I like A just as an end of a sentence, right? Like, whew, that was pretty offensive, eh? Whew, that shouldn't have happened, eh? Like, it just adds a nice little curve to the end of the sentence.
Are protesters who fly from one province
to
another
the fun
to dog Trudeau events, as we had earlier in the campaign. People also wonder about foreign interference. We've heard warnings about the possibility of this happening in Canada, where foreign actors are seeking to disrupt or create chaos, in an otherwise
No, I can't do a Quebecois
However,
accent. It's too racist.
Last night, speaking to our colleagues on power and politics, Evan Balgord, who is the executive director of the Canadian Anti-Hate Network, said that in his opinion, what we're seeing happening here is something that is more organic and more grassroots. Take a listen.
There isn't like one big organization that's organizing this stuff, nor is there any big money behind them. We know that there are groups of people who kind of share conspiratorial beliefs around COVID, including many of them who are part of Canada's racist right, which is kind of entirely embedded within that movement now. And they're kind of following the Prime Minister on his tour around the country.
Is this all about COVID? Well, you saw in some of those pictures signs and T-shirts for the People's Party of Canada. They have been part of a lot of the crowds we've started to see. My colleague Hannah Thibodeau, yesterday, she is traveling with Justin Trudeau's campaign. She spoke to a PPC candidate in London, Ontario, where the gravel throwing happened.
There has been an increase in hate crimes as well, yes.
That candidate's name is Chelsea Hillier, and she said that these crowds should not be dismissed as just people who are angry about COVID measures. Take a listen.
Anti-masker, anti-vaxxer, it is nonsense. It is absolute and complete nonsense.
We're anti-Trudeau.
Anti-Trudeau
is more like it.
We are pro-freedom.
We'll talk to Hannah about this very thing
pro-freedom.
In just a few minutes.
Where have you heard that
before?
before?
This hour, Janice. But in the meantime, what are we hearing from other party leaders about what happened?
Well, you might remember at the end of the second week of the campaign, Conservative leader Aaron.
So I'm just going to fast forward this a little bit. It is not acceptable to throw objects at anyone ever, no matter how angry you are, and it's never okay to try and intimidate people who don't agree with you or the media enough. There's Jagmeet Singh's comments.
I'm worried about my volunteers. I'm worried about the people that come to events. And so I don't want any of the folks around me and the folks that want to participate in democracy to feel any threats of violence.
Now, Justin Trudeau yesterday was adamant he would not back down. He said this sort of thing just makes he and his supporters, his campaign's candidates, more determined. But you know what, Heather? You do wonder what this means for our democracy. One of the best parts of covering campaigns is seeing people participate, be good citizens, get engaged.
Okay, you absolute cartoon characters. This makes Canada seem so juvenile. Goddamn the media. It's like, what is going on? What is happening to our beautiful country? People are angry now. Yeah, people are like, this has got to be one of the angrier elections. At least it's the angriest one I've seen in my lifetime. But because the situation is not getting better. Genuinely, how can you not be upset? It doesn't matter what group you're a part of, right? Since the start of the pandemic, it is just like shined a light on the fact that we have these like class stratifications, on the fact that we seem to have a disproportionate amount of Indigenous and Black Canadians who are dying at much higher rates than other Canadians. The more wealthy you are as well seems to play a large factor into it. The fact that frontline workers are getting COVID, people who are in meatpacking plants are getting COVID way more often, people who are in fulfillment centers at Amazon are getting COVID. And meanwhile, these companies, and it doesn't matter if it's Amazon or it happens to be a Canadian company like Bell, are making so much more cash now. They are printing cash, and at the same time, no one is pointing the finger at the things that are really causing all of this. No one is pointing the finger at what people should be actually angry or upset at. So of course they are listening to people who are going to tell them radical things. The PPC is going to tell you that it's immigrants, because of course that's how the PPC operates. And the anti-maskers and the anti-vaxxers are going to tell you it's the tyrannical government of Justin Trudeau who is forcing you to stay in your homes and forcing you to wear masks and forcing you to take vaccines against your will, and you must now stone him. It's the only way to do it. Effectively stone him. Something else to say about the PPC. I haven't talked a lot about them. Obviously, the Conservatives are the big thing to worry about in the election. The PPC are not. The PPC have like a fractional amount of support, but their support is growing. And their support is growing because they are obviously enveloping all of this anger and this far-right nationalism, and also the anti-mask, anti-vax side of things. Something funny, I did not know Mark Emery, if this name is new to you, he is known as the Prince of Pot, aka the marijuana man of Canada. Back before marijuana was legal here, we had a magazine similar to High Times in the United States called Cannabis Culture. Cannabis Culture was established by this man, Mark Emery, who was fighting for a very long time for weed legalization. He didn't care which political party got it, he just wanted weed legalization, and that was basically what he was fighting for. He got extradited to the United States for selling seeds in Canada, something that was technically legal by the Canadian government, but because he was selling seeds to Americans, you successfully extradited him, and he had to spend some time in jail inside of the United States. He was the weed martyr, and for a while he kind of had this air of being a lefty. He was not. None of us knew this, but he was actually a huge weirdo creep who was preying on very young women, sometimes twice under his age. He's been heavily Me Too'd, both by people who have worked with him and his exes as well, and now is apparently running as leader of the PPC in his writing, and has asked for... This is the statement he made about Justin Trudeau today. And this is from, again, the most famous stoner, I'd say, in modern Canadian history. He is a vile leader. He deserves a much worse fate. I'm thinking Mussolini. He tweeted this out about the Prime Minister of Canada. Yeah. That's PPC candidate. Yeah. Just gotta, like, you can't do that. You can't do that in Canada. There's a lot of laws against that. Here's another PPC person that I've been wanting to talk about for a while. The Instagram... this one's really silly. The Instagram account of Maxime Bernier's candidate in St. John, New Brunswick is pretty intense. This was all posted during the writ period by Nicola Daz, and he's a PPC candidate. The value of semen. The vital energy. The semen that supports your life, which shines in your sparkling eyes, which beams in your shining cheeks, is a great treasure for you. 1 drop of semen is manufactured enough for 40 drops of blood. Mark here how valuable this fluid is. 40 meals gives rise to 1 drop of blood. 40 drops of blood gives rise to 1 drop of semen. 1 ejaculation could repopulate the entire US of A. Sexual fluid is your glow, your vibrance, your contentment. It also gives strength to your prana and powers your ability to be present. As a person who conserves their sexual fluid and begin to move it upwards in the body, then he gains tremendous power. Just as you save money in the bank, save some for your essence. Could you imagine? Like, I love how it moves upward in your body. Does it all reach the mind eventually? Or are you just like, ugh, so much semen in November, have not combed once, collecting.
Every sperm is sacred, every sperm is great.
Vote PPC.
If the sperm is wasted,
Vote PPC.
is quite irate.
Ooh, probably definitely ran the gamut on whether or not I'm going to be dim-cut for that. Oh, we didn't read all of it. Nakula Das, the PPC candidate, by the way, has his own show, and it's called The Late Morning Program with Namarasa Podcast. The Power of Semen Retention. He will teach you the great powers of semen retention, everybody. So make sure you keep that in mind. It's important. But again, all this goes back to this original thing I was talking about. Like, so much of the left online, I know, just seems more like a bunch of lefties having fun online. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's a beautiful, wonderful thing. Go have fun online, everybody. Go be silly. Go call Steven Crowder a dog cum drinker. I do. You know, there's nothing wrong with all of that. But when it gets to the point where you get kind of LARPy, and people talk about how there's no point in becoming involved in politics whatsoever, that the only thing that will save any of us is the glorious revolution that is coming any single day now, stuff of this nature. Well, that's when I want to remind you, again, that the other side of the political aisle, the right, the far right, the alt-right, they are being organized in strange ways online, but QAnoners are actually trying to enact into the real world, IRL, the things that they want to desire to see, the change they want to see. So this article in ProPublica about thousands of Trump supporters taking over local GOP positions, unprecedented grassroots groundswells devoted to Trump's insistence that the 2020 election was stolen, that is both horrifying to me and also should be a blueprint. This is the stuff that the left should be doing outside of trying to do performative, let's do the force to vote. Let's get all this kind of stuff. Like, I've been saying this for a while. We don't see this on the other side. You don't see thousands of groundswell lefties, anarcho-communists, syndicalists, leftists, socialists, anarchists, every single one of them, trying to take over every single facet of government through the political system. Because a lot of the ideas you might have may be things that resonate very, very well within your local community. You might already be involved in your local community. We talk about that. You know how Robert Evans has said, please listen to Robert Evans' latest podcast, the second season of It Could Happen Here, because it sounds so very grim. And I know a lot of people feel helpless constantly. You're always looking at the news and it's like climate catastrophe. I have no power. This, I have no power. That, I have no power. He talks about how the power comes from the bottom up, not from the top down. And I mean that. I know that sounds weird when I'm talking about politics at the same time, but it doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter if you decide that you're going to take it upon yourself and the one thing you're going to concentrate on is building this beautiful community garden in the center of your like little area. And that is something you're going to use to be able to give away and feed people who might not have enough time to shop and grow groceries for themselves. You're going to upscale that and work on a community fridge so people can have food. You might work on building social housing, but that's it. It doesn't have to be social housing. And on top of that, you also become Che Guevara, right? But that's just your one project. But as long as every single person is doing something from the ground on up, building dual power, building actual mutual aid, where you're getting people less dependent on the systems that have failed them, that is how you start to actually rise and grow the left and benefit everybody simultaneously. Because if you're able to do that, if you're able to provide, let's say, some social housing or even some food to people who wouldn't otherwise have it, that's time that they can then spend trying to unionize their workplace, right? Like, I was going to have to spend my X amount of hours working and now I'm going to have to go out shopping and now I'm going to have to go out cooking. No, that part's been provided to you by this little community thing. That sounds like it's just some hippy dippy nonsense. It's not. That's how power is like raised from the ground on up. People in leftist organizations have been doing that forever. The beauty of the Rainbow Coalition and a lot of what the early Black Panthers were doing was they were feeding kids, you know? Like, they were actually starting these food programs for children because, yes, that does help. If you are able to feed your community, again, that is less time that people will be spending having to do other things like work mundane jobs in order to just survive along the way. So it is incredibly important. And that's something that everyone should be spreading. Like, it doesn't necessarily have to be that you have to run for office, because I know some people don't want to. I don't want to. I wouldn't want to be a politician. but it can be anything. Like you can choose what is your way to contribute, and you can go forth and you can do that, and you can teach other people to do the same. And hopefully, I was going to use the metaphor of a fire, but maybe there's a nicer one. Like raindrops in the desert, we will, I don't know what the song is. We'll spread it in a good way. Like jam. Like peanut butter and jam. Spread it like peanut butter jelly. That could be it. Do you want movies and Serfs watching the movies? So then come over to the new channels. It's the Serfs cinema. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. Can you do the thing, you know, that thumbs up and comment and all those things that help us out in the algorithm that controls every aspect of our lives? Also, if you happen to have a Facebook account, can you delete it? Like just delete it. You should probably delete your Facebook account because it's not a great company. But hey, if you can't do that for whatever reason, I understand. And could you also go to facebook.com/thesurftimes then and give us a little like and a follow. We're just trying to push back against the fact that people like Ben Shapiro happen to dominate the platform entirely. And when everyone asks why do older generations believe the things they believe, one of the problems is the majority of them on social media use Facebook. So to counter that, we're just going to be on there too now. Also, if you happen to have a union or a worker co-op or even a leftist project, podcast, website, Zoom, MySpace, it doesn't matter. We will advertise it for free on this channel. All you got to do is go to weareserfs.com and use the forms that we got there, weareserfs.com. Thanks, everybody.
To our gods, Tigro and Payton El Jus, we pray to you, our sky daddies, to keep us safe from harm. To our monarchs, Tom Spiker and the Tim Caucus, we shall humbly clean your golden toilets in your spatial palaces. To our lords, Ultra Wolf, Eva Nudie, Trevor R., Alexander Thaler, Ryan Lubin, and Jeff Lamb, we are eternally grateful for this small segment of land for us to toil and work. To our knights, Ariane McCarthy, Daniel Sutton, Ants Are Still Running the World, Coulter Smith, Val 9000, Jenna Tall, Dark Puppy, Quiet One 85, Anna Loves Riley, Omni, Riley and Anna, Poodlehawk, Multimondi, Trevor Janis, Lemmy 101, Anthropofojak, Sharon 42, Chronic to Hemphog, Catherine, Phone Jenny, Radical Maniac, Ramona Costa, Jimmy Bignuts, Violent Orchard, Sophie Baby, Political Puppy, Andreas Chiringuito, Zach Christensen, Jopi, Josh Mickelson, Todd Buckingham, and Todd Lajeunesse. We raise our glasses, we raise our swords, and we salute you, our friends. And to Lance, you are the wind beneath my wings.